The blizzard did not warn them. It did not gather slowly on the horizon or tease the sky with drifting flakes before revealing its true strength. It arrived all at once, slamming into the northern plateau with the force of a collapsing world. Sergeant Daniel Reeve had been on winter deployments for over a decade, but he had never seen a storm like this one. A storm that moved as if guided by intent, swallowing the ridgeline, the sky, and the team's visibility in a matter of minutes. At first, he believed it was just another Arctic front sweeping through the mountains, the kind that made breathing, burn, and navigation difficult. But then the wind shifted pitch, dragging with it a low, grinding moan from somewhere beneath the snow, a sound so deep and ancient it made the hair on the back of his neck rise. Even before Daniel understood what the sound meant, Cato reacted. The German shepherd froze, paws braced against the ice, body rigid, ears pinned flat beneath the hood of blowing snow. His muscles trembled with a tension Daniel knew well. The dog sensed danger long before humans did. Daniel leaned close, gloved hand brushing Cato's flank, feeling the tremor, the alertness, the barely contained urgency. Cato was not merely uneasy. He was warning him. The rest of the recon unit struggled forward through the whiteout, silhouettes blurred by curtains of wind-driven ice. Daniel shouted to Lieutenant Parker, trying to cut through the roar, but the storm devoured his voice. The plateau beneath their boots felt unstable, not with the shifting of fresh snow, but with the low groan of something vast beneath the surface. The blizzard's intensity made depth perception useless. The entire world collapsed into a swirling wall of white. Daniel forced himself forward, Cato at his side, each step sinking into drifts that rose higher by the second. He knew they had to reach the outcropping further down the slope, where rocks still jutted through the ice. If they could make shelter fast enough, the team had a chance. If they didn't, the storm would eat them whole. Cato barked then, a sharp, piercing sound that cut through the wind with the precision of instinct. Daniel saw the shepherd's head jerk toward the ridge behind them. The ground vibrated again, stronger this time, and Daniel's stomach dropped with the understanding he had been hoping was wrong. The sound wasn't the storm. It wasn't the wind. It was the mountain. The snowpack was shifting in massive, interconnected sheets, the kind that fractured like broken glass when pressure reached a breaking point. He felt the first tremor beneath his boots, a ripple that radiated outward across the slope. The storm screamed harder, funneling through the pass like an angry, living thing. Daniel turned, raising his arm to signal the team, but before he could complete the gesture, the world gave way. The avalanche did not start with a crack. It started with silence. The wind paused for a breath, as if the storm itself inhaled sharply. Then a thunderous roar exploded across the ridge, louder than rotors, louder than artillery, louder than anything Daniel had ever experienced. The ground dropped out beneath him. He felt weightlessness, a terrifying suspension between balance and freefall. Snow, ice, and broken layers of wind-hardened crust collapsed into a racing tidal wave. Daniel saw Parker's silhouette vanish, swallowed by the cloud of white. He heard someone yell, maybe calling his name, maybe screaming, but the roar drowned everything. Cato lunged toward him, teeth bared not in aggression, but in urgency, as if trying to reach Daniel before the storm took him. Daniel reached out, gloved hand grasping for the shepherd's harness, but the avalanche struck like a collapsing building. The force hit him sideways, ripping his arm back, tearing him off his feet. Snow surged over his head, blinding him. Cold needled into his face like shards of glass. His body tumbled, twisted, slammed into unseen shapes. He heard the mountain groan again, the deafening percussion of thousands of tons of snow rushing downward. He clawed desperately for anything to anchor himself to, but the avalanche seized him completely, dragging him down the slope in a violent churn. The world became nothing but movement and cold. He tried to protect his face with his forearm, gasping for breath, but every inhalation filled his mouth with snow. Disorientation set in fast. Up and down ceased to exist. He was tumbling through a white, suffocating void. Panic scraped the edges of his mind, but training kept him from surrendering to it fully. He forced his limbs to move, to fight, to try to swim upward through the shifting flow of snow. The weight pressed against him from all sides, and the temperature dropped further, stabbing into his bones. Cato! The thought shot through him with sudden clarity, cutting through fear. He had lost sight of the shepherd before the avalanche struck, but he prayed the dog had avoided the worst of it. Cato had instincts for terrain that no human possessed. If he survived, he would track Daniel. He would fight through the storm. He would push forward long after any other living thing had given up. Daniel clung to that hope as the avalanche hurled him downhill at terrifying speed. After what felt like an eternity, the momentum shifted. The snow slowed, thickened, compressed. Daniel felt himself sinking deeper, dragged down by the settling weight. He fought to stay near the surface, clawing upward, but the avalanche packed around him like wet cement. His arms grew heavy. His legs stopped responding. He pushed one last time, hoping to break through, but the snow sealed him incompletely. Darkness pressed against his eyes. He tried to fill his lungs, but the air was thin and icy. He could hardly move a finger. He was entombed. His heartbeat hammered inside his skull. The cold gnawed at his fingertips first, then his wrists, then deeper. He forced himself to inhale slowly, to conserve what little oxygen remained in the pocket around his face. Everything hurt, but not sharply. A dull ache creeping through him, the kind that warned of hypothermia. He whispered Cato's name into the darkness, the sound muffled by the snow. He wasn't sure if he spoke it aloud or only thought it. Minutes passed, or maybe hours. The cold stole time. The blizzard roared overhead, but Daniel could no longer hear it clearly. The snow around him insulated sound, turning the storm into a distant hum. His breathing slowed against his will. His eyelids grew heavy. The darkness felt thick and peaceful, pulling him down. Hypothermia was not a violent death. It was quiet. So quiet he barely noticed the creeping numbness reaching his chest. He thought of Cato again. The first day they met during selection, the shepherd's sharp amber eyes studying him before accepting him as handler. He pictured Cato bounding across the training yard, tail high, eager, unstoppable. He remembered the warmth of the dog pressed against him during long nights on deployment, the silent understanding they shared. Cato would look for him. If the shepherd was still alive, he would not stop. Daniel wanted to believe that, needed to believe it. But as the cold spread upward through his body, belief felt fragile. A sudden vibration rumbled through the snowpack. For a moment, Daniel thought it was another avalanche forming, but the tremor was smaller, rhythmic, scraping. Something moved above him. The noise grew louder, sharper, scratching, pawing, breath. Daniel forced his eyes open into the darkness just as a muffled bark cut through the snow. A bark he knew better than anything in the world. Cato. Energy shot through him, a burst strong enough to momentarily chase the cold away. Daniel tried to respond, tried to make noise, but the snow choked the sound. He managed the faintest movement of his fingers, brushing against the icy layer near his face. Above him, Cato dug harder, claws tearing through compact layers of snow. The dog growled low, determined, refusing to surrender. Each scrape came faster, more desperate. The shepherd was fighting the mountain for him. As the last of Daniel's strength faded, he felt snow shift above his forehead, a sliver of cold air touching his skin. Cato barked again, closer. Daniel exhaled slowly, letting the sound reach upward through the tiny pocket of air. Darkness closed in again, but this time it carried a flicker of hope. He was not alone. Cato was coming. Cato emerged from the snow with a violent shake that sent white crystals flying from his coat. The storm whipped around him in furious spirals, the wind slashing across his fur, but the shepherd did not pause. The blizzard's roar was deafening, yet Cato's ears cut through the noise with razor-sharp precision, hunting for the faintest sign of his handler. The avalanche had torn the world apart, reshaping the slope into a treacherous, shifting wasteland of broken snow layers and fractured ice. But Cato did not see chaos. He saw the path Daniel had taken. He smelled it. He felt it like an electric pulse running through his muscles. Everything in him, training, instinct, loyalty, pulled him toward one purpose: find him. He lowered his nose to the wind, drawing in the frozen scent of the mountain. Thousands of swirling smells flooded his senses: broken ice, pine needles far down the slope, the faint metallic tang of exposed rock, the sharp bitterness of the blizzard itself. But beneath all of it, faint and nearly lost, was Daniel. The shepherd could distinguish that scent anywhere, even buried beneath meters of snow. His nostrils flared, and he angled his body, muscles coiling before he launched himself downhill with powerful strides. The terrain was brutal. The avalanche had carved a ragged channel down the mountainside, leaving jagged debris and unstable snowfields in its wake. Every few steps, Cato's paws broke through crusted layers, plunging into pockets of loose powder. Other times, the surface was slick, forcing him to dig his claws deep to maintain balance. A lesser dog would have been swallowed by the storm or turned back by sheer exhaustion. But Cato pushed harder, leaning into the wind with relentless purpose. He stopped suddenly, head snapping to the side. A faint sound trembled through the wideout, distant, indistinct, almost imaginary. It was not Daniel's voice. It was the mountain shifting. More snow thundered down from the ridge above. Not a full avalanche, but enough to send deadly slabs tumbling. Cato assessed the danger in seconds. He maneuvered carefully, body low to the ground, ears twitching as he listened to the pattern of the moving snow. When the rumble faded, he advanced again, weaving through fractured drifts and unstable mounds. The shepherd paused near a cluster of broken branches protruding from the snow. His nostrils quivered. Daniel had been here. Recently. The scent was faint but clear. Sweat, gun oil, fabric, the familiar trace of Daniel's gloves. Cato's tail rose with sharp focus, and he pressed forward. The storm battered him, but he forced his weight against it, climbing over a bank of hardened snow. His paws dug furrows as he descended the other side. Then he found the first piece of equipment: Daniel's radio. It lay half-buried, antenna bent, casing cracked. Cato sniffed it, circling tight patterns, pressing his nose into the snow. The device was cold and lifeless, covered in frost, but Daniel's scent clung to the strap. Cato let out a low, distressed rumble. He nudged the radio once, as if urging it back to life, then continued down the slope. A gust of wind cut across the mountain, then, howling with terrifying force, it nearly knocked Cato sideways, sending him sliding a few feet before he regained footing. The shepherd braced himself, hackles raised, as the storm unleashed another brutal blast. Snow stung his eyes like shards of broken glass, but he barely blinked. He tucked his head and pushed through the gale, emerging into a slight dip where the wind's fury softened. That was when he found the first sign of the avalanche's true depth: a long, curved trench carved by the sliding mass of snow. Cato followed it, sniffing along the edge, where loose powder met the hardened base. The scent grew stronger here. Daniel had been carried through this channel. Cato's paws moved faster, desperate, clawing for purchase as he rushed downhill. His breath puffed in rapid bursts of steam. His heart hammered. Every instinct urged him to move quicker, to break the mountain open with his own teeth if he had to. He reached a spot where the snow depth was different, compressed, settled more tightly. Cato lowered his chest to the ground, sniffing deeply, inhaling the faint warmth left behind by a human body struggling against the cold. He pawed at the surface, testing. There. The scent was strongest here. Daniel was beneath him. Without hesitation, Cato dug. Snow flew behind him in frantic sprays. His claws tore through the hardened crust. He lowered his head, using his teeth to break apart denser chunks. The storm raged above, but Cato didn't pause, didn't look up, didn't flinch. His entire world narrowed to this patch of snow. Daniel was here, alive. Cato could feel it. Something deep in his chest thrummed with certainty. He would not stop. Minutes passed. Cato tunneled deeper, his paws aching from the strain, his legs trembling with exertion. The cold bit at the pads of his feet, but he ignored the pain. He shifted tactics, pressing his shoulder into the snow to widen the hole, biting and pulling at stubborn sections that refused to break. He growled at the mountain, furious that it dared to hold his handler captive. He paused only when the scent hit him like a concentrated pulse. Directly beneath him, his breaths came fast now, fogging the air as he thrust his head deeper into the tunnel he had carved. The snow here was different, warmer, thin, damp with the exhalations of a trapped human. Cato's heartbeat surged. He barked, sharp and urgent, the sound muffled by the tunnel walls. Daniel. The shepherd dug harder, scraping until the snow thinned enough for a sliver of air to break through. A faint whiff of carbon dioxide reached his nose, the unmistakable signature of a human exhaling shallowly. Cato barked again, louder this time, his voice echoing through the narrow shaft. Daniel, somewhere in the darkness below, stirred. The sound reached him like a memory breaking through a dream. He could not answer. Not yet. His body was heavy, slow. His limbs refused commands. But he heard that bark. He knew it. That sound belonged to his partner, the one creature who would rather freeze than give up. With a renewed burst of ferocity, Cato widened the opening. Snow cascaded around him as he clawed deeper, until finally his paw broke through to something soft. Fabric. A jacket sleeve. Cato stilled for a single heartbeat, then pressed forward, nose pushing into the gap, teeth carefully gripping the thick material. He tugged, gently at first, then with urgency. The arm did not move far, but it moved. Daniel was alive. Cato released the sleeve and barked again, signaling instinctively for his handler to respond. Then he climbed out of the tunnel briefly, searching the surrounding slope. The team. Where were they? The humans were gone, scattered, buried, or missing. Cato could not rely on them. He had no one to call for. The blizzard drowned out any distant voices or signals. He had only himself. He dove back into the tunnel. This time, he began widening it from the outside, circling around the spot several feet away, digging into the snowpack from a new angle. He understood terrain better than most men. He used gravity, shifting his digging direction so snow would fall away rather than collapse back onto Daniel. He worked like an expert, a creature built for survival and rescue. Even though he had never been trained as a search and rescue dog, what he had was loyalty, instinct, the drive to protect. The tunnel grew wider. Cato squeezed inside again, using his powerful shoulders to force the snow apart. He bit through the last section, separating him from Daniel's upper torso. His teeth brushed against a strap, Daniel's harness. He pulled, growling with effort, dragging his handler upward inch by inch. Daniel's head tilted closer to the pocket of air Cato had created. It wasn't enough to free him completely, but it was enough to keep him breathing. The shepherd nudged Daniel's face with his nose, whimpering softly. Daniel's eyelids fluttered. His lips parted. A whisper of warm breath touched Cato's muzzle. The dog's tail thumped once, sharply, before he turned his body, positioning himself to pull again. But the mountain was not finished. A new vibration rumbled beneath the snow. Cato froze, ears erect, muscles tense. The shift was small but dangerous. Another collapse was possible. The storm howled with renewed fury. shaking the slope. Cato's instincts screamed at him. He backed up the tunnel, emerging into the frigid wind as snow began to settle oddly over the section he had just cleared. For a moment, he stared down at the fragile opening, breath steaming in the icy air. He could not leave Daniel. He would not. But he had to work smart. If the tunnel collapsed while he was inside, neither of them would survive. He circled the area, reading the snow with a precision only a dog possessed. He tested each point with his paws, listening to the hidden echoes of shifting layers. Then he found it, a safer angle, a natural weak point in the snowpack that, if exploited, could create a vertical breach to Daniel without destabilizing the pocket he had uncovered. Cato began digging again, upward this time, creating a secondary hole that connected to the tunnel at a protective angle. Snow cascaded away behind him. The wind fought him, pushing drifts back toward his work, but he kept going, pacing himself, conserving energy while maintaining speed. His claws were numb, but he dug as if the cold were nothing but air. Minutes passed. The new hole widened. The snow thinned. And then, finally, daylight, or what passed for daylight in a blizzard, reached Daniel. Cato slipped back into the first tunnel and tugged again at Daniel's arm, pulling him toward the new vertical breach. Daniel moved this time, just slightly but enough. Cato pulled harder, growling deep in his chest, muscles burning from effort. Slowly, painfully, Daniel's upper body broke through the snow. His face emerged into the freezing wind. He gasped, sucking in a full breath for the first time since the avalanche buried him. His eyes remained closed, his skin pale, his lips trembling with cold, but he was breathing. Cato pressed close, draping his body across Daniel's chest, sharing what warmth he could. The blizzard screamed around them, but Cato did not move. He lay there, a living shield against the storm, refusing to abandon his handler even for a moment. The shepherd had found him, and he would not let him go. The world returned to Daniel in fragments, drifting in and out of consciousness like broken pieces of a fading dream. He felt cold first, a deep, marrow-aching cold that pulsed through his bones in slow, merciless waves. Then came the pressure in his chest, a tightness that made every breath feel like dragging air through glass. Sound arrived next, muffled and distorted, as if he were underwater. The storm's howl reached him as a distant, heavy drone. Beneath that, softer, more rhythmic, was something warm and familiar. A steady breath, a heartbeat, fur pressed against his cheek. The unmistakable scent of snow-damp dog hair and earth. Cato. Daniel's eyelashes fluttered open, revealing a dim, swirling grayness overhead. Snowflakes whipped sideways in the wind, blurring the sky into a shifting haze. His vision swam. His head felt heavy. His limbs, he couldn't feel them properly. He tried to lift his hand, but it barely moved, trembling as it rose an inch before settling back into the snow. He closed his eyes again, fighting the instinct to let exhaustion drag him under. A warm weight nudged his jaw. Something wet brushed his cheek. Cato's tongue. The shepherd whined softly, shifting his body closer, pressing his warmth into Daniel's frozen skin. Daniel forced his eyes open again. Cato's amber gaze stared down at him, intense, watchful, unblinking. The shepherd's face was half covered in frost, snow clinging to his whiskers and ears, but his eyes burned with fierce determination. Daniel tried to speak, but his lips barely parted. The cold had thickened his tongue. The words came out as a dry, cracked whisper. Cato. The shepherd leaned closer, tail thumping once in recognition, his breath warm against Daniel's cheek despite the brutal wind. Daniel swallowed hard, fighting to make sense of his surroundings. He remembered the blizzard swallowing the ridge. He remembered shouting at the team. Then the avalanche, an impossible force dragging him down, flipping his world upside down. And now this, a small pocket carved beneath the storm, a space barely large enough for him to lie half buried, with Cato blocking the wind and shielding him with his own body. Daniel's mind drifted to the others. The rest of the unit was somewhere on this mountain, scattered or buried or worse. He tried to sit up, to rise, to force the mission back to the front of his consciousness, but his muscles refused the command. Pain speared through his ribs, sharp and immediate, forcing him back down. Cato noticed. He nudged Daniel's shoulder gently, as if urging him to stay still. Not yet. Survive first. Daniel breathed out slowly. The exhale shook with cold. The storm roared louder overhead, rattling the snowdrifts that formed a fragile shelter around them. The opening through which Cato had pulled him let in slivers of wind that stung his skin. Cato repositioned himself to block it, his broad back absorbing the blast of icy air. Daniel felt the shepherd tremble, whether from cold or exhaustion. He couldn't tell, but Cato didn't move away. He curled himself against Daniel's side, acting as insulation, warmth, protection. Daniel blinked hard, trying to assess his situation. He could feel sensation returning to his fingers now, sharp pins of pain as circulation struggled back into frozen tissue. His legs were still numb. His chest burned with every inhale. He needed to move, but moving too quickly could send him into shock. He needed warmth, shelter, and time, none of which the mountain was inclined to offer. Cato, good boy, he breathed, the words nearly lost in the wind. The shepherd's ear twitched. He lowered his head, resting it lightly on Daniel's shoulder. Daniel closed his eyes. It wasn't sleep he sought, it was steadiness. A moment to gather what remained of his strength. But rest was a luxury the storm would not allow. A violent gust slammed into the slope, shaking the snow crust overhead. A chunk of ice loosened and fell beside Daniel's head. Cato erupted into a growl, positioning himself between Daniel and the unstable drift. The snowpack trembled. Daniel forced his eyes open, heart racing at the sound. The avalanche had changed the terrain. They were in the middle of a chaotic debris field, with deep snow pockets that could collapse at the slightest provocation. Staying still was dangerous. Moving was dangerous. Everything was dangerous. But staying here much longer was not an option. Daniel could feel the cold creeping deeper, tightening its grip around his core. Hypothermia would finish what the avalanche had started. He had to move, had to get out of this shallow grave before the next shift buried them both. With a groan that scraped his throat raw, Daniel tried again to push himself upright. This time he got farther. His torso rose a few inches. His right arm braced against the snow. His left arm shook violently from the effort. Cato stepped back just enough to give him space, watching every movement with sharp, anxious focus. Daniel's breath hitched as pain radiated through his ribs like hot wires. Probably bruised, possibly cracked. Nothing he couldn't work through. He had fought in worse conditions. He had pushed his body far beyond this before. But this time he was frozen, battered, oxygen-deprived. Every movement sent nausea rolling through him. He grit his teeth and forced himself upright. The world tilted. Snow blurred into sky. Cato barked sharply and pressed his shoulder against Daniel's side to steady him. "Easy. I'm okay," Daniel rasped, though the words were more wish than truth. He looked around. The blizzard hadn't let up. If anything, it was getting worse. The wind cut across the slope with a howl that felt almost intelligent, as if the storm hunted anyone foolish enough to survive the avalanche. The visibility was nearly non-existent. Shapes shifted in the white distance, but Daniel couldn't tell if they were broken rocks, snowdrifts, or ghosts of the mind. He reached for Cato, gripping the dog's harness. The leather felt stiff with ice. Cato leaned into the touch, giving Daniel something solid to anchor himself with. "We need a place out of the wind," Daniel said through chattering teeth. Cato seemed to understand. He turned toward Daniel, giving the man a moment to gather his strength. Daniel pushed onto his knees. The movement cost him precious energy. His breath fogged the air in fast, shallow bursts. He swallowed, trying to steady himself, tasting blood at the back of his throat. He planted one foot into the snow. It sank deep, well past his ankle. He shifted, tried again. Cato circled him once, as if assessing the safest path. The shepherd nudged Daniel's thigh, then angled his body to one side, tail straight, posture alert. He wanted Daniel to follow him. "Lead the way," Daniel whispered. Cato moved forward slowly, carefully, placing each paw with deliberate precision. Daniel crawled after him at first, dragging himself across the snow with numb hands, gritting his teeth as ice tore his skin. Every movement was agony. His muscles protested. His lungs burned. But Cato moved ahead, stopping every few feet to check on him. Every pause a silent reminder that he wasn't alone. They progressed inch by inch across the slope, climbing toward a cluster of uneven shapes half hidden in the storm. Daniel squinted through the snow. Were those rocks? Trees? The mountain blurred them together. Cato barked once, low and short, encouraging him. Daniel reached a small drift, bracing himself against it as he pushed to his feet. He swayed dangerously. Cato jumped onto the drift, turning back to steady him, shoulder pressing into Daniel's knee until he regained balance. The shapes ahead grew clearer, jagged rocks protruding from the snow, part of a broken outcropping the avalanche hadn't fully consumed. If they could reach the lee side of one of the larger boulders, they could escape the worst of the wind. It wouldn't be warmth. It wouldn't be safety, but it would buy them time. Cato forged ahead, his body cutting a narrow path that Daniel followed, stumbling, dragging his legs, clinging to scraps of strength. Each step was a battle. The cold clawed at his nerves, urging him to lie down, to let sleep take him, promising peace if he simply stopped moving. But Cato wouldn't let him. Every time Daniel faltered, the shepherd circled back, barking, nudging, tugging at his sleeve, refusing to allow surrender. Daniel kept going because the dog demanded it, because that steady presence burned through the cold like a single ember refusing to die. At last they reached the rocks. The wind softened immediately, blocked by the jagged stone wall. Daniel collapsed against the base of the largest boulder, chest heaving. Cato pressed against him, panting hard, exhausted but refusing to lie down until Daniel was settled. Together, they crawled into the shallow gap between two slabs of stone where the snow formed a natural pocket. The space was cramped, but it was sheltered, a brief reprieve from the fury of the storm. Daniel leaned back, nearly fainting from the rush of dizziness. Cato curled himself at Daniel's side, tucking his nose beneath the man's arm. Daniel wrapped an arm around the dog, pulling him close, sharing body heat. They were alive. Barely, but alive. Daniel laid his forehead against Cato's, feeling the shepherd's warm breath against his skin. "You found me," he murmured, voice cracking. "You really found me." Cato thumped his tail once, a soft, tired beat against the snow. Outside, the blizzard raged on, unforgiving and immense, but inside that small shelter carved from rock and ice, man and dog clung to each other, refusing to yield. They had survived the avalanche. Now they had to survive the night. Daniel woke to a silence that was not true silence at all, but the eerie hush of a storm conserving its strength. The wind had dulled to a low, distant moan, and the snow no longer hissed against the rocks with the same fury as before. Instead, the mountain breathed in slow, heavy rhythms, settling and shifting beneath the night sky. It was still dangerous, still alive in the way only mountains were. But the worst of the blizzard had passed. For now, Cato lay pressed against him, the shepherd's steady warmth the only thing that had kept Daniel from freezing while unconscious. The dog's body was curled tight around his side, chest rising and falling with soft, deliberate breaths. Frost clung to Cato's whiskers, and his ears twitched every time the wind shifted against the rock wall outside their narrow shelter. He had stayed awake through the night, or through what Daniel could guess were most of the night's brutal hours. The dog was exhausted, but he had not slept deeply. He had guarded Daniel instead. Daniel slowly lifted a hand and rested it on Cato's neck. The shepherd opened his eyes at once, amber pupils glowing faintly in the pre-dawn gloom. When he recognized that Daniel was awake, Cato shifted his weight with a quiet whine and nudged Daniel's chest as if assessing his condition. "I'm still here," Daniel whispered, voice raw and broken from cold. "Thanks to you, buddy." Cato thumped his tail once and pushed his head under Daniel's arm, urging him to sit up. It took Daniel several seconds to gather the strength to move. Every joint felt locked in ice. His ribs screamed when he shifted, and a deep ache pulsed along his spine from the unnatural angle he had slept in. His legs tingled painfully as circulation returned, and his fingers were still stiff from partial freezing. But he could move, slowly, carefully. That alone was a victory. He dragged in a breath, wincing as the cold air seared his lungs, then forced himself upright. Snow fell from his shoulders in powdered cascades. Cato rose with him, shaking the frost from his coat and stretching each limb with deliberate, trained control. The shepherd had no idea how tired he should be. He had no room for self-preservation where Daniel was concerned. The dog's instincts ran deeper than fatigue. Daniel blinked at the faint light outside, a muted gray glow filtering through shifting curtains of wind-blown snow. Dawn, or something close to dawn. Hard to tell when the sky was nothing but steel-colored clouds and endless frost. "How long?" he murmured under his breath, but the mountain offered no answers. He lifted his hand to rub stiffness from his face and winced when his fingers brushed a swollen cut above his eyebrow. He had forgotten about the bruises. The avalanche had tossed him like a rag doll. Even breathing hurt, but nothing felt broken beyond ribs. Pain he could handle. Pain meant he was still alive. They needed to move. The shelter they had found was temporary at best. A fresh shift in the snowpack above could bury the pocket entirely. And if the storm returned with full force, this shallow refuge would offer little protection. Worse, Daniel had no idea where the rest of the team was. He didn't know who else had survived the avalanche, or if anyone had radioed command before the blizzard devoured their signal. They had been cut off from base for nearly 20 hours before the avalanche struck. Now, with the radio crushed beneath tons of snow, they were on their own. He reached for the broken device buried halfway beneath the snow at his feet. Useless. The screen was cracked, the battery frozen solid. He tossed it aside with a heavy exhale. Cato stepped forward, sniffing at the opening of their shelter. His posture sharpened, ears rising. He pushed his nose into the wind, drawing in long, measured breaths. Searching, testing. "What do you smell?" Daniel whispered, though he knew the shepherd could not answer. But he watched the dog's body, his stance, the subtle shifts that revealed his decisions. Cato's nostrils flared wider. His tail rose slightly. He turned his head to the left, toward a deeper part of the slope that descended into a grove of half-buried trees. Something down there held his attention. Daniel carefully crawled from the shelter, wincing as the cold bit into his freshly exposed skin. The wind was sharper out here, though not nearly as violent as it had been during the storm. He placed one hand on Cato's harness to steady himself and scan the landscape. The mountain was unrecognizable. Where the ridge had once been smooth and predictable, there were now jagged fractures of upheaved snow and dark wounds where rocks protruded through ice. Huge drifts stretched across the slope, sculpted overnight into knife-edged ridges and hollow bowls. The avalanche had erased everything. Trails, markers, even familiar terrain features. It had left behind a wasteland of white chaos. Cato moved forward patiently, glancing back now and then to ensure Daniel followed. The shepherd tested the ground with each step, using an awareness no human possessed. He avoided deep pockets where snow sank sharply beneath his paws. He circled around unstable slopes that looked deceptively safe. He listened to the wind with uncanny focus, as if interpreting the mountain's shifting breath. Daniel trusted him completely. Cato would never lead him where the snow could swallow them again. They moved slowly, painfully slowly, Daniel leaning heavily on his knees at times as the cold fought him, each step. His breath came out in ragged plumes. The deeper they descended, the darker the morning seemed, as though the storm clouds refused to let daylight reach them fully. A sudden crack echoed through the ravine. Daniel froze. Cato stopped instantly, head turning sharply to the right. His body stiffened, muscles rippling beneath his coat. His tail dropped low, not in fear but in readiness. His eyes scanned the slope as if tracking invisible movement. "What was that?" Daniel whispered. Cato barked once, quietly, a short warning sound. Snow shifted again in the distance. A second crack, then a low, groaning exhale. Not the wind, not the mountains settling. Something was moving. Daniel crawled to a nearby outcropping and pressed his body against the rock, squinting into the white haze. He scanned the ravine carefully. Cato stood beside him, body taut, his focus pinned on a cluster of broken trees half buried beneath piled snow. Then Daniel saw it. A shape, large, motionless at first, half covered by the drift. A human arm. Daniel's breath caught. His heartbeat spiked with a mixture of dread and hope. He scrambled to his feet, stumbling as he pushed forward, ignoring the pain ripping through his ribs. Cato surged ahead, but kept close enough to intercept any danger. Daniel reached the drift and dropped to his knees, brushing away snow with frantic movements. The sleeve was familiar. Camouflage, the same pattern as his unit. He cleared more snow, revealing a shoulder, then a chest, then a helmet rim caked in frost. Parker. Lieutenant Parker lay twisted against the remains of shattered pine tree, half buried but visible. His face was pale beneath the frost, his mouth slightly open, snow crusted into the edges. Daniel pressed a shaking hand to the man's throat. A beat, slow, faint, but present. He exhaled, not relief, not entirely, but a release of tension so sharp it made his vision blur. "He's alive," Daniel whispered, voice choked. Cato barked again, louder this time, circling Parker and sniffing for signs of further danger. Parker's eyes fluttered. His lips trembled. He wasn't conscious, but his body responded weakly to the cold. Daniel shook his shoulder gently. "Lieutenant, Parker, stay with me." A soft groan escaped Parker's throat, barely audible over the wind. Daniel had no medical supplies, no heat sources, no way to call for extraction. He had two options: stay here and die waiting for help, or move. Get Parker to shelter. Find a defensible spot with natural insulation. Build a temporary survival point. "Cato," Daniel murmured, turning to the shepherd. "We need to find shelter big enough for 3. The dog seemed to understand. He lifted his head, sniffed the wind again, then nudged Daniel toward the slope east of them, where the mountain had fractured into larger boulders and deep crevices. Daniel slid an arm under Parker's shoulders, wincing as pain flared across his ribs. Parker was heavy and limp, dead weight, but Daniel tightened his grip. "I've got you," he muttered, more to himself than to the lieutenant. "I've got you. We're not losing anyone today." Cato moved ahead, scouting, glancing back repeatedly to guide them. Step by agonizing step, Daniel dragged Parker through the ravine, muscles screaming, breath ragged, vision darkening at the edges. The cold gnawed at him, but Cato's steady presence fueled a stubbornness that refused to die. They reached the boulders. Cato disappeared briefly between two slabs of rock, then barked from within. Daniel followed, pulling Parker behind him. The gap opened into a hollow beneath the broken boulders, large enough for all 3 of them. Snow did not reach this deep. Wind did not roar here. It was not warm, but it was shielded, a place to breathe. Daniel lowered Parker carefully to the ground and slumped beside him, chest heaving, vision swimming. Cato curled against both men, warm and vigilant, refusing to rest. Daniel rested his hand on the dog's back. "We're alive because of you," he whispered, closing his eyes. And for the first time since the avalanche, Daniel let himself believe they might survive the mountain. The hollow beneath the boulders was little more than a wound in the mountain, a pocket carved by ancient collapses and hidden from the sky by slabs of jagged stone. It was cramped, uneven, and smelled of mineral dust and frozen earth, but compared to the storm outside, it was a sanctuary. Daniel sat with his back against the cold rock, Parker unconscious beside him, and Cato curled across both their legs like a living barrier against the cold. The shepherd's breathing was steady now, but his ears flicked constantly, tracking every shift in the wind beyond their shelter. Even here, even after everything, he refused to let his guard drop. Daniel blinked away the dizziness clouding his vision. His body begged him to sleep, to sink into the heavy numbness spreading through his limbs. But sleep was not an option. Not yet. He looked down at Parker, brushing loose snow from the lieutenant's jacket. Frost had formed along Parker's eyelashes and beard. His skin was pale, tinged dangerously with blue. Hypothermia had its claws in him deeper than in Daniel. If they didn't warm him soon, he wouldn't make it through the hour, let alone the day. "Stay with me, Lieutenant," Daniel murmured, tapping Parker's cheek lightly. "We're not losing anyone out here." Parker didn't respond. His breath shuddered in short, uneven bursts. Daniel adjusted the man's position carefully, pulling Parker closer to Cato's body heat. The dog immediately shifted, pressing his side against Parker's ribs and lowering his head over the man's chest protectively. Daniel let out a shaky exhale. "Good boy. Keep him warm." Cato nudged Parker gently with his nose, acknowledging the task. Daniel rubbed his hands together, wincing at how stiff his fingers were. He had to think. Their situation was still critical. The storm had eased, but the sky outside was thick with gray clouds, and the wind still stirred eddies of snow along the ravine. They had temporary shelter, but no gear, no active radio, no fire, and no guarantee of rescue. Worse, the avalanche had obliterated their original route. They were disoriented, fatigued, injured, and in dangerous terrain, still prone to shifting. They needed warmth, hydration, and a plan. Daniel forced himself upright, leaning heavily on the rock wall to counter the stabbing pain in his ribs. He checked his pockets. Most were empty. His backpack and survival kit had been torn away somewhere during the avalanche. All he had left was a folding knife, a crushed energy bar wrapped in frozen plastic, and the remnants of a thermal blanket that had ripped nearly in half. Hardly enough for 3 men, one unconscious and a dog. But it was something. He carefully unfolded the tattered blanket. The material crackled loudly in the cold. It was stiff with frost, but intact enough to trap some body heat. Daniel spread it over Parker and Cato, then pulled the remaining edge around his own shoulders. It wasn't perfect, but it helped slow the cold's advancement. "We need more insulation," he muttered to himself, scanning the hollow. Loose snow along the edges of the rock walls could be packed to fortify their shelter. Snow, when densely packed, acted as insulation rather than a coolant. Trappers and mountaineers often relied on snow caves in emergencies. If Daniel could seal some of the cracks and create a more enclosed space, they could retain more heat. Not warmth, never warmth, but less brutal cold. He turned to Cato. "I'm going to reinforce the shelter. Stay with Parker. Don't move him." Cato whined softly, but remained curled against Parker, understanding his role. Daniel crawled toward the entrance, testing each movement carefully. The pain in his ribs sharpened, but he gritted his teeth and kept going. He gathered snow in his gloves, packing it against the inner wall. His hands went numb almost instantly, but he pressed on, shaping the snow into thick mounds to block drafts. He worked slowly, methodically, pausing only when his fingers screamed in warning or when his breath grew too shallow. Minutes passed like hours. The cold gnawed at him relentlessly, and his vision blurred with each movement. But he kept going until the hollow became a tighter, more insulated chamber. Dimmer, more claustrophobic, but safer. When he finished, he backed away from the entrance and slid down beside Parker again. The temperature inside had risen slightly, from deadly to survivable. Cato glanced up at him with tired eyes, but pressed closer to Parker, unwavering in his vigilance. Daniel let out a long breath and leaned his head back against the stone. The exhaustion hit him like a tidal wave. Every muscle quivered. Every breath hurt. His arms throbbed from digging. His legs screamed from overuse. His entire body felt like it hovered on the edge of collapse. But he couldn't give in. Not yet. He needed information, orientation, a sense of direction, anything that would help them figure out their next move. He shifted his weight and crawled toward the entrance again, lifting himself just high enough to peek out. The ravine stretched below like a scar through the mountainside, filled with debris and broken snow slabs. Heavy clouds smothered the sky, but the horizon faintly brightened with the promise of daylight. The wind had dropped to a restless whisper, swirling powdery snow in gentle, deceptive currents. "Looks calmer out there," Daniel murmured. Cato rose and padded to his side, poking his head out with him. The dog sniffed the air long and deep, testing it with careful precision. His posture tightened. Alert. Focused. Daniel frowned. "What is it?" he asked quietly. Cato lowered his head, whiskers twitching. He sniffed again, then turned sharply to gaze down the ravine. His ears pricked forward, then rotated slightly as if tracking something faint, distant, and unfamiliar. Daniel followed the dog's gaze, but saw nothing but swirling snow and jagged rocks. "Cato, what do you smell?" The shepherd didn't move for several seconds. Then he let out a quiet, restrained bark, barely a sound, but enough to convey intent. Danger? Or discovery? It was hard to tell. Cato's body wasn't tense with fear. It was tense with attention. Daniel squinted harder. Movement flickered at the edge of his vision. Not snow shifting. Not wind. Something darker. Something that moved with deliberate weight. His heart stumbled in his chest. A silhouette appeared on the slope further down. Human. He slipped back slightly, gripping the rock. His instinct was to shout, to call out for help or warn them. But something about the figure stopped him. They were moving oddly, stumbling, swaying, as if fighting the wind, but also injured, confused. Cato growled under his breath. Not a warning to Daniel. A warning to whatever was out there. The figure drew closer, and the details sharpened. It was Corporal Hayes. Or had been. Hayes stumbled forward, half collapsing against a fallen tree. His face was pale, blood dried across his forehead. His left arm hung at an impossible angle. Snow clung to his uniform in thick clumps. His movements were disjointed, erratic, as if he were drifting between consciousness and delirium. Daniel's heart lurched. He moved to rise, but then Hayes looked up, straight toward them. His expression was empty, blank. His eyes did not hold recognition. They did not hold anything. He opened his mouth. No sound came out. He took one step upward, then another, and the mountain shifted again. A fresh crack boomed through the ravine, sharp as thunder. The snow beneath Hayes liquefied, swirling into a sudden sinkhole. Hayes dropped instantly, swallowed whole before Daniel could shout. His arm flailed once above the surface, fingers clawing at empty air. Then he vanished beneath the slide. "Cato!" Daniel shouted, instincts surging. The shepherd barked and lunged forward. "Wait, no." But the dog didn't charge out of the shelter. He stopped at the threshold, digging his paws into the ground, barking frantically at the spot where Hayes had disappeared. His body shook with the instinct to rescue, but he didn't move into the danger. He knew he couldn't. He knew the snow was unstable. Daniel froze with his hand against the rock, breath trembling. Hayes was gone, just like that. The mountain had taken another man. Cato stopped barking, his chest heaving. He turned his head toward Daniel, eyes burning with frustration and grief. Daniel pressed a hand to the shepherd's back. "I know," he whispered. "I know. They couldn't save Hayes. Not without tools. Not without stability. Not without risking all three of their lives." Daniel lowered himself back into the hollow, numb from more than cold now. Cato followed, but reluctantly, pausing once to stare back at the ravine before crawling inside beside Parker again. Daniel's thoughts were a chaotic storm, but one fact cut through the noise. They weren't alone on the mountain. At least three had survived the avalanche: himself, Parker, and Hayes. And if Hayes had lived long enough to wander the ravine before the snow took him, others might be out there too. Injured, lost, cold, dying. "Cato," Daniel said softly, "we're not done yet." The shepherd rested his head on Parker's chest, but kept his eyes fixed on Daniel, alert and waiting. Daniel leaned back, closed his eyes for a moment, and whispered into the darkness of the hollow. "We're going to find them. All of them. Anyone still alive. We'll find them." Outside, the wind shifted, howling once before falling into a haunted stillness. And somewhere in that silence, Daniel thought, just for a moment, that he heard another distant human cry echoing across the ravine. Daniel did not move at first. The cry, if it was a cry at all, might have been nothing more than the wind clawing its way between the broken ridges. The mountain was full of echoes, strange distortions that made the air sound alive. But something about that faint, distant note had pierced him in a way the storm's howling never could. It was too sharp, too human, a sound produced not by nature, but by someone fighting to stay above it. Someone alive. Cato lifted his head at the same moment, ears rising, muscles tightening beneath his thick coat. The shepherd stared toward the mouth of their shelter, nostrils flaring as he drew in the cold air in deep, testing breaths. His tail stiffened. A low, rumbling growl vibrated through his chest. Not fear, not warning, but recognition. He had heard it too. Daniel turned slowly toward the ravine, bracing himself against the rocks as he crawled to the entrance. The cold air bit sharply into his lungs as he leaned out, scanning the broken snowfields below. Dawn was creeping in now, though it barely changed the sky's color. The clouds were still heavy, the lights still suffocated by low gray ceilings. But the visibility had improved enough that Daniel could distinguish the jagged shapes of boulders, fallen trees half buried beneath the drifts, and fractured trenches carved by the avalanche's violent path. "Cato," he whispered, "show me." The shepherd stepped forward until his front paws touched the snow outside the shelter. He sniffed deeply, circling twice as he aligned himself with some invisible scent or sound. Then he stopped, head snapping sharply to the left, toward a stretch of slope that curved around the ravine wall and disappeared into a cluster of shattered pines. Cato barked once, a sharp, decisive note. Daniel's pulse thudded with new urgency. Someone was alive out there. Someone who hadn't been taken by the avalanche or the shifting sinkhole that swallowed Hayes. Someone who needed them. He ducked back inside the shelter and knelt beside Parker, touching the lieutenant's cold cheek. Parker's condition was still precarious. His breathing was shallow, and his skin remained worryingly pale, but his chest rose in steady, faint patterns. He had stabilized barely. Daniel forced himself to think clearly. He couldn't leave Parker here alone. Not in this cold. Not unconscious. If the storm returned, or if another shift struck the ravine, the shelter might collapse. But taking Parker with him was impossible. The lieutenant was too heavy and too fragile to move safely. Daniel himself wasn't in any shape to drag another man across unstable terrain. If he tried to move Parker now, the effort might kill both of them. He ran his hand across his face, frustration tightening his chest. "Cato," he said quietly, "I can't leave him. I can't risk carrying him. And I can't ignore that cry." Cato whined, nudging Parker's shoulder gently before turning back toward the ravine. His amber eyes flickered with conflict, loyalty divided between guarding the wounded and answering the call of the living. Daniel rested his forehead against the cold stone wall, breathing slowly, forcing the icy air into his lungs until the pain steadied his thoughts. He had to think strategically. He had to assess their priorities. 1. Parker was alive but weak. Hypothermia had a tight grip on him. He needed warmth, rest, and close monitoring. 2. The crime meant another survivor, likely immobilized or trapped somewhere down the slope. Time was running out for them. 3. Daniel was injured, exhausted, and partially frozen. But he was still the only human fully conscious and capable of moving. 4. Cato was the key. The dog was strong, agile, and had an uncanny ability to navigate the terrain. Daniel would need him. He looked at Cato again. "Can I trust you to lead me back?" he murmured. The dog tilted his head, ears lifting. Daniel took a long breath, grabbed the ruined radio, and placed it beside Parker's hand, as though the symbolic act alone could anchor him, keep him tethered to the world. He pulled Parker's jacket tighter around him and adjusted the thermal blanket to cover every inch possible. Then he pressed his gloves against the lieutenant's neck, feeling the faint warmth. "Hold on," he whispered. "Don't you dare quit on me." He turned back to Cato. "We're going," he said, "but we're coming back." The shepherd stepped toward him, posture shifting into alert readiness, tail stiff with purpose. Daniel crawled out of the shelter and rose to his feet, staggering slightly as the cold dug its claws deeper into his muscles. The wind brushed against him, not a howl now, but a quiet, restless murmur, like the mountain was waiting. Cato darted ahead, several steps, nose to the ground, weaving through the debris. He paused often to check that Daniel was following, then continued, guiding him with the precision of a practiced tracker. Daniel moved as fast as he dared, lungs burning, ribs aching with each uneven step. The snow was unpredictable, sometimes firm, sometimes collapsing beneath his weight. He used his hands often, stabilizing himself against rocks or fallen limbs protruding from broken drifts. "Cato," he called softly, slow down, don't go too far." The shepherd glanced back, stopping on a ridge above him. He waited long enough for Daniel to catch up, then nudged forward again, following the scent or sound of the survivor. They descended deeper into the ravine. The walls of snow on either side rose higher now, sculpted into twisted, precarious formations that loomed over them like frozen waves. The air grew colder. The light dimmed. It felt as though they were entering the throat of the mountain itself. Then Daniel heard it. A cry. Faint, short, muffled, but unmistakably human. "Cato," he rasped. The shepherd sprang forward, leaping across a cracked slab of ice, skidding down a narrow chute of wind-packed snow. Daniel stumbled after him, adrenaline drowning the pain in his ribs. He reached the base of the chute and caught sight of Cato standing motionless beside a mound of collapsed branches and snow. Something protruded beneath them. A leg. Daniel's heart hammered. He rushed forward, dropping beside the heap. Cato was already digging, paws flinging clumps of snow aside. Daniel joined him, clawing through frozen debris until the shape beneath took form. A uniform, partially buried. A torso. An arm. The arm twitched. Daniel froze. The buried soldier groaned faintly. "Easy," Daniel said, his voice shaking. "We've got you. Hold on." He and Cato dug faster. Snow flew in frantic bursts. Daniel's gloves tore, exposing skin to the biting cold, but he didn't stop. He uncovered a shoulder, then a helmet, then a face streaked with frost and blood. Corporal Riva. Her eyes were half open, unfocused, rimmed with ice. Her lips moved soundlessly. Daniel shook her gently. "Riva, stay with me." Her gaze drifted toward him, then toward Cato. "And Mac," she whispered hoarsely. Is that Cato?" Daniel blinked rapidly. "You're alive." That's what matters. Riva's mouth trembled. I, I heard him barking, thought I was dreaming. You're not dreaming, Daniel said, clearing snow from her chest. We're getting you out. Riva winced as he freed her other arm. Her left leg was pinned beneath a broken branch, but Daniel braced himself and lifted enough to drag her free. She cried out in pain, sharp, raw, real, but breathing, alive. Daniel exhaled shakily. Cato sniffed along Riva's body, checking for other injuries. His nose brushed her side, and she managed a weak, trembling smile. He found me, she whispered. Daniel shook his head. He finds everyone. But the relief was short-lived. A new sound cracked through the air. Not the wind, not a settling drift. A deep, resonant rumble from the ridge above. Daniel's stomach dropped. Another shift. Cato stiffened, barking furiously toward the slope. The mountain was about to move again. Daniel grabbed Riva's jacket, dragging her toward the sheltering rocks. Move, he shouted, voice raw. Move now, Cato, go. The shepherd leapt ahead, guiding them fast, weaving through the debris. The rumble intensified. The slope groaned. Snow fractured above them in massive, breaking waves. Daniel pulled Riva with everything he had left. Cato, he roared. The dog darted to his side, barking wildly, guiding them toward a small outcropping, just as the mountain unleashed another avalanche. A deafening roar swallowed the ravine. Daniel threw himself forward, clutching Riva tight. Cato lunged beside them, and the world became white again. The world did not end in an instant, though it tried. The avalanche surged like a living thing, an ocean of ice and pulverized snow crashing down from the fractured ridge above. Daniel felt the blast of cold before the wave hit, a violent pressure that punched the air from his lungs. He threw himself over Riva's body, curling his arms around her shoulders as the mountain roared. Cato leapt into them a heartbeat later, his weight slamming against Daniel's side as the shepherd tried to shield them with his own body. Then the avalanche struck. Snow exploded around them with a fury Daniel had never known. It spun him sideways, wrenching him from his footing and dragging Riva with him. His grip faltered, then tightened again as instinct screamed louder than the storm. He held on to Riva with everything he had left. Snow pounded his back, slamming him into the ground and dragging him across rocks sharp enough to tear through fabric. Cato barked once, short, drowned, before disappearing beneath the rolling white. Daniel tried to shout for him. The wind tore the sound away. He felt himself tumbling, over, under, sideways, pulled by a force too immense to fight. Snow filled his mouth, seared his throat, blinded his eyes. His ribs screamed with every impact. His hands went numb. He clung to Riva until his fingers lost sensation, driven only by a single frantic mantra repeating through his mind. Don't let go. Don't let go. Don't let go. The avalanche slowed, then stopped. For a moment, there was only silence. A crushing, suffocating silence broken only by his own wheezing breath. Daniel tried to move and found he couldn't. The weight of snow pressed him down, pinning him on his side. But he could wiggle his shoulders. He could move his neck. And when he forced one trembling arm upward, it broke through the surface. Air, he gasped, dragging cold oxygen into his lungs until the pain sharpened enough to steady him. Riva, he rasped. His arm was still wrapped around her. She lay beside him, half buried, but not completely. Her face was exposed, eyes clenched shut, chest rising and falling in labored breaths. A miracle. Daniel pushed more snow away, freeing her shoulder and neck. You're okay, he whispered hoarsely. You're okay. Stay with me. A soft groan escaped her lips. Her hand twitched against his. He looked around frantically. Cato! Cato! His voice broke on the second shout. Panic flared like fire in his chest. Cato! A faint sound answered, muffled scratching. A bark weak but real. Daniel whipped toward the sound, spotting a small mound of snow trembling several feet away. He crawled toward it, digging with frantic, frozen hands. He tore through the surface, pulling away snow until he found a patch of dark fur. Kato, hold on, I've got you. The dog's head emerged first, shaking violently as he sucked in air. His eyes were wide, but alert, blinking frost away as he tried to pull his body free. Daniel dug faster, freeing his shoulders, then his torso, until Kato lunged upward and collapsed against him, burying his head into Daniel's chest with a trembling whine. Daniel wrapped both arms around him, ignoring the stabbing pain in his ribs. You're alive, you're alive. Kato pushed his muzzle into Daniel's chin, as if checking that Daniel was equally real. The moment lasted only seconds before Daniel forced himself to face the reality around them. The avalanche had swept them nearly 50 meters down the ravine, dumping them in a shallow basin surrounded by jagged debris. The slope above remained unstable. Snow cracked quietly with each breath of wind. One wrong vibration could trigger another slide. They had to move. But he had 3 priorities now, 3 lives depending on him. Parker in the shelter, Riva beside him. Kato pressed into his side. He had to bring them together. He had to get them all to safety. Riva, he said softly, shaking her shoulder. Stay awake. Can you hear me? Riva blinked slowly, eyes struggling to focus. Sergeant, is that you? Yeah, it's me. And Kato. He placed Riva's hand on the shepherd's fur. Kato leaned into her gently, offering warmth. We found you. You're going to be okay. Her lips trembled. My leg, I can't move. I know. I've got you. Daniel scanned the slope. The path back to the shelter would be brutal. The avalanche had destroyed their tracks completely. But the geography was still familiar enough. He could reconstruct their route. Slowly, painfully, but he could do it. He slid his arms under Riva, bracing himself to lift. Pain tore through his ribs like a knife. He swallowed it, gritted his teeth. On 3, he muttered, mostly to steady himself. 1, he lifted. A sharp cry broke from Riva's throat. Daniel flinched but didn't stop. He adjusted her weight, stabilizing her head against his shoulder as he rose to his feet. His legs trembled violently, but they held. Kato, he panted lead. The shepherd moved ahead instantly, ears high, sniffing the wind, searching for the safest path back. Daniel followed, step by agonizing step, leaning on sheer stubbornness more than strength. The snow was unpredictable. His boots sank unevenly, each movement a battle against exhaustion and injury. Minutes passed like hours. Riva murmured incoherently against his shoulder, drifting in and out of awareness. Daniel whispered reassurance whenever her breathing hitched. Kato never let them fall behind. He paused often, barking softly as if urging Daniel onward. Halfway up the ravine, the wind shifted again, bringing with it a chilling gust of new snow. The sky darkened slightly. The storm was coming back. Not now, Daniel whispered, breath shaking. Not now. Kato barked sharply. Hurry. Daniel pushed forward harder, driven by a desperate mix of fear and determination. His ribs screamed, his vision blurred, but he saw the broken boulders ahead, the entrance to their hollow. We're close, he said, voice cracking. Almost there. Kato dashed ahead, reaching the shelter first. He squeezed through the entrance and barked inside. 2 sharp notes. Daniel staggered forward, ducking into the hollow with Riva in his arms. Parker lay where Daniel had left him, still breathing, still dangerously cold but alive. Daniel lowered Riva beside him, arranging her carefully to avoid her injured leg. Kato immediately pressed himself between both soldiers, warming them with his body. Daniel collapsed against the rock wall, vision tunneling. He forced himself to stay awake, forced his lungs to keep working, forced his mind to focus past the pain. They were together, all 3 survivors he'd found. He wasn't done, but the hardest part was coming. The storm outside deepened, wind beginning to howl once more through the ravine. Rescue wouldn't find them. Not in these conditions. Not before another avalanche made the ravine unrecognizable again. Daniel wiped the frost from his eyelashes and stared out into the white void. "We have one chance," he whispered. Cato raised his head. "We have to climb out of the ravine before the next slide." His voice trembled. "If we stay, we die." Cato pressed his forehead to Daniel's knee. "Ready." Daniel closed his eyes, held the dog's head with shaking hands, and whispered, "Tomorrow, at first light, we climb." The storm screamed back at him, but he didn't look away. When the storm finally broke, it did so in silence. Not triumphantly, not violently, just a quiet thinning of clouds over a mountain that had taken too much and spared too few. By then, Daniel could no longer feel the cuts on his face or the pain in his ribs. His body had gone numb in that strange way the edge of survival demands. Where sensation retreats, so the mind can finish the work alone. Riva and Parker were barely conscious as he dragged them upward, inch by inch, toward the ridge Cato had scouted at dawn. The climb was not graceful. It was not heroic. It was a collection of desperate movements under a wide, indifferent sky. But the dog understood the stakes. Cato moved ahead of them, paused silent on the snow, testing every patch before signaling Daniel forward. When Daniel faltered, Cato pressed against his side. When Riva gasped in pain, Cato circled back to nudge her elbow with quiet encouragement. And when Parker lost consciousness entirely, Cato stayed behind him, blocking the wind with his body. Hours later, they reached the plateau, flat, open, cruelly exposed. The air was clearer but colder. Daniel collapsed beside the two wounded, shoving the last scraps of the thermal blanket around them. He didn't expect the flare in his pocket to work. It was soaked, half-crushed, nearly frozen solid. But when he struck it, the flames sputtered into life, weak, flickering, terrified of the wind. Still, it burned. The rescue team found them by that trembling spark. 3 unconscious soldiers curled against one another in the snow, and a lone German shepherd standing guard over all of them, refusing to leave even when voices called from the ridge. Cato growled until he recognized Daniel's name, shouted in panic. Then he let himself be pulled from the cold. Later, in a warm medical tent, when Daniel finally woke, the first thing he felt was fur beneath his hand. Cato's head rested heavily against his arm, exhausted but alive. The dog opened his eyes and met Daniel's gaze with the steady, unbroken loyalty that had carried them down the mountain and back out again. And in that quiet moment, Daniel understood something the blizzard had been trying to teach them all along. Survival was never about strength or rank or the thin line between order and chaos. It was about trust, the kind forged in wide-out conditions, in broken ravines, in the moments when the world tried to bury them alive. The kind only a soldier and his dog could share, wordless and absolute. Daniel reached for Cato's collar, voice barely a whisper. "You saved us." Cato pressed his forehead to his chest. Outside, the last of the storm died over the ridge. Inside, a bond stronger than the mountain itself remained unbroken.